Let us have a look at how Agilists estimate and measure software and time. So Agilists neither like lines of code or function points. They claim that lines of code, they require substantial amount of upfront work, because you have to make a study actually how big the system is, what functionality does it include, how much lines of code is required for this functionality. And still, even if you do this substantial work, you arrive at some sort of uncertainty. Also, lines of code vary depending on programming language and programmer. So this is not a measure that you may rely on. They don't like function points either, because of course they eliminate function points eliminate locks uncertainty, but they still require a significant amount of time, and it's not always reliable. And according to Agilists, function points are too complex. Simply, many engineers are not even dealing with it because it's too complex for them. So what they have done is that they claim, what the heck, why should we bother to make exact measurements? It is actually impossible to measure within software engineering, at least to measure the size and to measure the time, the planet time, estimate the planet time. So, but they still say that you need to measure, you need to estimate size, but you have to have some kind of measure that is simpler to calculate than lines of code and function points. And as an exercise to show you how difficult it is to estimate the size, I want you now to look at these pictures, photos of different dogs. You have even names of these dogs, and you may stop this film and try it on your own to estimate the size of these dogs. And you will use the relative measure. What I mean with that is that you choose the smallest dog, you assign to it value 1. Then it doesn't matter what you mean by value 1, it's just the smallest dog and it gets value 1. Then you choose next dog, which you believe is twice as big as the smallest dog, and you assign to it value 2. And then so on and so on. You find a dog that is 4 times bigger than the smallest dog, so you give it value 4. Have it, and then stop the film now, try to estimate the size of these dogs, and come back when you are ready with it. Okay. The meaning with this exercise, when you do it in group, is to make you realize that no one has made the same guesses. I'm not saying accurate guesses. I'm saying that there were as many estimations as there were estimators. So it's difficult even if you have a picture of the dog. Now you can imagine when you have a software requirement and you have to estimate its size, and you have only a rough description of the functionality. So it is a very difficult thing to estimate. So what Agilists suggest is that you use this relative measure, just like dog points or dog size, for estimating the size of user stories, the size of requirements. So what you do is you assign each story a number of points. They are called user story points. And they are relative measure of how hard and time consuming the feature will be to implement. So what you do is, out of the stories, you decide that the smallest, or give some size to the smallest story, like 1 point, and then you try to find out the next story that is twice as big as the first one, and you give it twice as many points, and so on and so on. Let us see how they do this estimation. You simply do not act here like an engineer, like a professional. You are actually making educated guesses, just like this sailor is going to do to make educated guesses. This sailor wants to reach this island, but he doesn't know how far it is. It may happen that he is experienced enough so he can estimate the length, the distance, but still it's always difficult when you have cases like that. And he has nothing to compare. And if he has nothing to compare, then the task becomes very difficult. So what is the distance to this island? Well, let us say that this is this big island we are going to reach, and we are somewhere here at this point, and we have many knowns and unknowns. What we know is that the distance to the big island, well, we can see that there is a small island in the middle of this distance, and we may estimate that the distance to the big island is twice the distance to the first island. So, okay, this is what we know, but we don't know how long it will take to get to the first island. But we also know that it will take twice as long to get to the biggest island as it took to the first island. So, okay, what do? We simply make an educated guess. If the captain asks us how much time it will take to get to the first island, we will provide an educated opinion, like, okay, it may be about 12 kilometers to the first island. Our velocity may be 2 kilometers per hour, so probably we will reach this island in 6 hours. Good. So when we have reached the island, well, it took 9 hours. The distance was not 12 kilometers but 14 kilometers. So the distance to the big island must be now 28 kilometers. And we have also realized that our velocity was about 1.5 kilometers per hour. So now we better know how much time it will take to reach the big island. Probably it will take 9 hours. So we can now somewhat reliably estimate the distance and duration, but still there are many uncertainties. You don't know anything about the winds. The winds may suddenly come. You don't know anything about underwater currents. There may be underwater rocks, or there may be other surprises. And then it won't take just 9 hours. It may take twice as long time. So this is like within software engineering. You estimate the size, but you don't know what kind of obstacles you may encounter while reaching your goal, that is, while implementing some functionality. So story points are just like distances to the islands, or just like dog points when you estimate the size of dogs. But here both the sailors and software teams do not follow any formula for estimating the size. So the first distance or the first size is arbitrarily assigned a value, and then each additional distance or story is estimated by comparing it to the first story or the first distance. You usually triangulate your results, your estimates, so you may create columns of user stories, and in each column you put stories of the same size. So when you have a new story and you will assign some size to it, then you will of course compare it to the user stories that you already have implemented. And in this case, your educational guesses may become somewhat realistic. How do people agree on the size? Well, first of all, I would like to say that not many companies use user stories. They may use just person hours, calendar time. But that's fine, that's okay. So irrespective of whether you use calendar time or whether you use user stories, you have to commonly agree on the size of your stories. So what you do, you play a game, and this game is called planning poker. So you sit around the table, and the participants around the table are of course the ones who are involved in estimating the size. You give each participant a deck of cards with user stories, the sizes of the user stories, user points. So each card has an estimate, And for each theme or story to be estimated, you read the description of the story. You usually have some kind of a moderator who describes the story. Maybe the person who has stated the story is available, so he may provide some explanations. And then the customer product owner, this is the person that can be available, may answer questions that the team has. And then everybody estimates on their own each story. So you play poker, you do not show your results to anyone. And then when everybody is ready, so all cards are simultaneously turned over and shown to the participants. And of course, the estimations will differ. So usually those who have had high values and those who had low values, they will have to estimate and motivate. And then the group will discuss the results, and then they may re-estimate again, and they may continue discussing till they have come to some common consensus. Usually this requires 1 or 2 or 3 iterations. So if we compare the bigness in traditional and agile development, so the bigness in traditional development is either measured with lines of code or function points. In modern methods, agile methods, you may use story points, so you have a relative measure, not absolute measures. Okay. To measure size is one thing, but to measure time to do something is another thing. And when you do it, you have to think of 2 different time aspects. You have ideal time and you have elapsed time. Let us have a look here. A wife knows that her husband goes to see a football match, and she asks her husband how much time it takes, how long is the match. Of course you answer to your wife that it takes 1.5 hours. But is it really the elapsed time? Does it really take 1.5 hours? You have breaks, you have penalties, you have player exchanges, you may have injuries, you may have different things. So there are many things that are unplanned, and that's why the ideal time of the match is 1.5 hours, whereas the elapsed time may be 3 or 4 hours. And if you do not inform your wife about it, then you get problems when you come back home and the dinner is cold. So when you estimate time, you have to think that you have to be aware that developers do not only write code, they do not only test code, they do not only do requirements, they do not only do designs. There are many other things that they have to be available for. They may have to support current releases, they may be sick, they may be on different meetings, demonstrations, they may resolve different personal issues. Phone calls take time, special projects, they may go on training, they may have to answer emails, they may have to do various reviews and walkthroughs, interview candidates. There are many different things. They may have to fix bugs in former releases, and so on. But one thing what is important from the planning perspective is task switching. Usually when you are involved in projects, you as a developer may not be involved in only one project, but several projects. And the more projects you are involved in, the less time you have for each individual project. So what one has realized is that it's fine to have at most 2 projects, because sometimes you are stuck with one project with some problem, and when you go over to and work with the other project, you may suddenly, come up with a solution for the first project. So task switching is quite healthy here. But if you have too many projects, then just the time to switch from one project to another may be very time consuming, and then the developers may not be very productive. So when you estimate time, you should make sure that it is not the ideal time you are estimating, just the elapsed time, because when you estimate the ideal time, then you assume that, well, you will only work on some requirement, on some user story. You will be like on an isolated island. You have no one to communicate with. You have only computer and yourself. So everything you need will be on hand and you will be able to start. It's not like that. Before you start implementing, you may not understand requirements. You may have to discuss these requirements. You may not understand the design. You may not agree with the design that has been imposed on you by somebody else. But of course there won't be any interruptions because you are on your own. So you are winning some time for that. And also what is important is that you have to think of what time do you mean? Is it individual developers' time or is it team time? And ideal time, it means how many hours this person or this team will be available for that project without any interruptions, without anything else. So, for instance, for a certain iteration, you may go through each individuals involved, and you may see, even if those individuals work full-time, Jane will be only available 4 hours a day, and the other people will also be available for about 6 or 2 hours. So you have always to think ideal time, but whose ideal time? But even if you, well, look at my time, which is Mira has been assigned 2 hours and Jane has been assigned 4 hours, it means that probably Jane will be able to manage twice as much as Mira does. Well, it's not always like that, because actually your ideal time and the productivity does not only depend on time, but also on skill level, domain knowledge, multitasking, available to actual code. It may depend on many other reasons. So that's what you have to consider.